guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. After the event's over, make sure that y'all come outside and swipe out with your card and one cards. If you don't have your card and one card, you can just tell me your L number and I'll type it in for you. Today we have Kemon Neal. He was with Merrill Lynch. He's a recent graduate of Lamar University, class of 2011, with a business management degree. So let's give him a round of applause and welcome him. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'd like to kind of briefly talk about Finance 101, just kind of give you a brief overview of things that you should be thinking about as you make your transition into the workforce and starting and getting into good habits to help you succeed in life. Before I start, this is kind of an addendum, since it is a job fair, I kind of want to get some information from people on how much do we know about credit and how it affects your job hunt. Anyone? So we're starting at zero with credit. Okay. Well, how many people know their credit score? Show of hands. Learn what your credit score is, because it can determine if you get hired and if you're qualified for the job that you hold, especially if you're going into the financial field. They definitely do a thorough background check on you to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Some of the things that you don't want to have on your credit report. How many people have at least looked at their credit report? Okay, good. One thing that you want to do is definitely go to one of the credit reporting sites like TransUnion, Experian, Equifax, and check your credit report to make sure that there's no erroneous information that's on your credit report. And if it is, try to get that removed, because it does make a difference in your job hunt. Like I said, employers are starting to use more and more resources to help get backgrounds on the people that they hire. Things on Facebook, that type of deal, they look at everything. So the more professional image that you show and the history that you have with your credit will improve your chances on getting a job. That was sort of an addendum to my main presentation. But today we're going to talk about, well, let me back up first. Like Jacob said, I'm a recent Lamar graduate. I graduated in 2011. It took me a very long time to decide exactly what I was going to do with myself when I graduated from high school eons ago. I first went to UT to study civil engineering, and I bounced back and forth between Lamar and UT for the last, let's say, decade or so. Finally wound up in graduating with management, and so I kind of sat where you sat not too long ago, and actually I'm flirting with the MBA program here, so taking a few courses trying to improve my skills in finance. So still here, I'm very active in the community here in Beaumont and the Golden Triangle. I serve on the Lamar Alumni Panel, so I still support the school and try to help out wherever I can. So enough about me. First few disclosures, we're required to do this by law, but basically some of the products that or solutions that we offer aren't FDIC insured, and you can read the rest of it. But this is legality. For today's discussion, what we're going to be learning about is the importance of investing for the future, and what things that we should be putting in place while we think about our financial futures. Balancing the pressures of meeting today's financial needs against tomorrow's goals, prioritize, and help knowing exactly what we need to start focusing on once we get out of college. And how to reduce debt. How many people have student loans? Good of you. So we'll learn how to start managing some of that later on. So what's on your financial to-do list? Invest for retirement. Does that strike you as odd? So you're just starting out. Should you be investing and saving for retirement? Yes, definitely, 100%. One of the biggest things that you have is the benefit of time. So the earlier you start, the better. Reduce your personal debt. And also, well, I don't know how many parents we have here, but sometimes this comes up, is funding the next generation's education expenses. And we will get to that if we have time. But from our own internal resources, or from our own internal research, we found that even among affluent Americans, usually having $250,000 and up in investable assets, which we count as affluent, most of them still, as of October 2010, still need to tap into their retirement funds, their long-term saving plans to help fund their day-to-day immediate needs because of lack of planning normally. But most of them were cover monthly expenses, rent, house note, car note, what have you. Pay down debt is another big one, and compensate for loss of income. Unforeseen things happen. You lose your job, your spouse gets ill, there's a reduction of income into your household. How do you handle that? How do you prepare for that? And half of affluent Americans are taking tangible steps to help them meet their long-term goals. The biggest thing I'd like to join is that they're making decisions together, but they're sticking to a budget. And that's one of the things that you should get into the habit of now and doing, is making a budget and trying to stick to it as much as possible. That will help you tremendously, and I can't stress this enough, tremendously, make progress towards your goals. Which brings us to budgeting. How many people know what budgeting is technically? Not my accounting guy. Well, let's be interactive. I don't want to be the only one talking, so someone talk to me. Yes, ma'am.
But I guess how you save your money, I'm assuming?
Well, basically, yes. How, out of your income, when you get into the workforce and start making money, you're going to get a paycheck, right? Well, hopefully you do, right? How are you going to allocate that paycheck out? Are you going to go run to the mall and buy the latest sale at Dillard's, or are you going to pay your bills, or how are you going to allocate what you have coming in and what you have going out? It's as simple as that, but it's a very hard practice for most people to do because it takes a lot of discipline. So basically, in managing your finances, you have your spendable income, which for most people is your paycheck, and some people might have other income sources if they do work on the side. They have investments and they're getting some dividends or interest payments. Minus your monthly expenses. And the correct way to do a budget is to list all of your fixed expenses, ones that don't fluctuate month to month, and then all your variable expenses. And you should add all of them up, everything that you spend. How many people use a debit card? Only a debit card. Okay. I would say get into a good habit, because a lot of banks that you have, even credit unions now, have tools that allow you to see where your money's going. If you're spending a lot of money on gas, if you're spending a lot of money on food, normally that's already broken down to you, or you can usually export that information into a personal software program like Quicken or something like that to help you track what you're spending.
Mint.com.
Okay, yeah, Mint is another one, definitely. And Mint is actually pretty good because you can start pulling in like your credit card accounts and just basically anything in your financial universe. You can integrate it all and see exactly what your total picture is looking like. On this list here, do you see anything that's missing? That you should have as a fixed expense, probably. Help you out. Excuse me, don't spill. You shy.
Something for like a retirement payment?
Exactly. You should be saving something, right?
Savings, yeah.
And it's easier to save if you think of it as a fixed expense. This is my retirement expense for this month. And you should try to make a goal of saving that every month. Normally, I try to recommend at least 10% of your income, more if possible. There's no such thing as saving too much money, to me anyway. It is possible. You can take it to extremes, but for most people, it's not. So how do we, when we have our budget, we set our budget up. Any questions on budgeting? So we're pretty clear on that. Can we stick to one? Can we make one and stick to one? Yeah, I didn't see too many hands on that one. Investing. So we have our savings. We're saving regularly. How do we make it grow? We invest, right? Now, investing becomes kind of a very complex topic pretty quickly, but we'll stick to the basics. A few things that you should do when you're starting to invest, and there are a few different mechanisms that will be available to you. You can save through your company's 401k plan. You can open up an IRA, and we'll get to that in a second. You can do this your personal bank account and start trying to save in that fashion. But if you're planning on going into the stock market or trying to do some type of investment, I strongly recommend that you empower yourself first and start learning all that you can about investing. Because like I said, it can be a very complex area of life. First step in doing that is, after educating yourself, first thing when you start to make your investment plan is that you should identify your financial goals. If I wanted to buy a car in 2 years, would it make sense for me to buy a 10-year CD? Do we know what CDs are?
No.
CDs start for certificate of deposit. Is usually can purchase them at a bank. They normally lock you into a long period. Let's say a 10-year CD locks you in for 10 years and it makes you an interest payment. So if you have a 2-year goal and you have a longer investment horizon, those two don't match up, right? So we should match our investment goals to we should match our goals, our financial needs to our goals. So whatever our goal is, and that'll be individual. Everyone will have a different goal. Some people might want to buy a home. Some people might want to buy a car, send their kids to college, name it.
Are CDs different from savings bonds?
Yes, they're totally two different entities. CDs are issued by banks and other financial institutions. Saving bonds are issued actually by the government, so that comes from the Treasury. But the idea is kind of the same. It's going to grow over time, and it's a fixed time period. Since you're going to start off probably very busy in your careers, it's always good to have professional help. Hire someone that knows what they're doing. You can do a lot of harm to yourself if you try to go out and do it on yourself and not do investing by yourself and not really know what you're doing. So work with a professional, even if it's just to get an allocation plan together and do it at home, if you care to. And monitor your portfolio. A lot of times, especially I kind of found in my profession, a lot of people save for retirement, but they started back when they were 20 and now they're 55, they're ready to retire, and they're still retiring. Their investments haven't changed over that whole period, and it may not be appropriate. So you need to regularly, at least once a month, at least once a year, I say check on your performance and make your adjustments as needed. A sound investment strategy depends on, number one, is definitely outlining your goals. Once again, whatever goals that you have, make them, you need to prioritize them, and you need to make them very specific. It's not a good thing to say, well, I want to retire comfortably. That's nebulous. It's better to say I want to retire at 55 with $1 million in my portfolio, and this is how I plan to do it. So make it very specific. I want to buy a house in 3 years, and I want to put this amount of down payment on it. Something of that nature. Make them very specific so that you know what you need to do in order to achieve that goal. Now, in investing, I say there's 4, but we break it down to 3 major asset classes, and basically that's stocks, which we also call equity, and that's typically your stock market, ownership in a company that's going to pay you a dividend or have some growth. Bonds, which are things like, on a broader sense, are like fixed income. That's usually money that you loan to someone and they're going to make payments to you. So think of it as an IOU. It's kind of like sometimes like CDs. A savings bond is a bond. It's in the word. It's in the name. So you're making a loan to the government in case of a savings bond, and they're going to pay you some interest and pay you back at some period of time. So that's how a bond typically works. And then cash. Cash is cash. That's, probably the least volatile of all the different assets. And each one of these assets have a different risk. Stocks tend to be the riskiest. Bonds tend to be less risky. Cash tends to be the least risky. But your reward is also proportionate. So anyone knows what cash in a checking account pays right now? Almost nothing, virtually nothing, 0.001% or something of that nature. Bonds, they range depending on how long you go. Shorter term bonds usually pay less than longer term bonds. I'd say on the average, shorter term bonds are paying 0.5% to 2%, somewhere in that range. Longer term bonds are up to 3%, even 4 or 5%, just depending on the risk level associated with them. And then stocks, anyone know the historic return on stocks? Usually on average since, I'd say the 1930s, you can probably the real returns are probably around 7%. So you have a lot more reward, but you have a lot more up and down with the stock sector.
Well, you said you would put 4 categories. What would the fourth one be?
Fourth one, I kind of qualify because they're a form of equity, but I count real estate as a different asset. And when I mean real estate, I say anything of the earth, well, the earth itself, the land, and anything from it. So that's most of your commodities like gold, cattle, just things that are physically, tangibly there. And they usually don't, the risks associated with them aren't quite the same as some of the other asset classes. But really it is a form of equity because you own land, you own cattle, you own whatever. So out of those 3 or 4 asset classes, very broadly, we can make what's called an asset allocation. And research has shown that actually most of your return is actually done through not what you really invest in per se, but how these asset classes interact with one another. The variability is 90% of the variability in a portfolio is actually determined by the asset allocation. So getting this right, especially when you're younger, helps tremendously. Thank you. So normally, let's talk about asset allocation a little bit. Normally when you start off, you're young, you normally can have a little bit more risk than, say, a retired person, because a retired person's worked all their life, they save their money, you can't take a 50% swing down in the market, right? You probably have a little bit more time to recover that, because as it averages out, usually the stock market is going to be more growth. So let's take the moderately aggressive one. You see, we don't have a lot of cash. That's our least risky asset, only 1%. 19% in bonds. That gives some stability to the portfolio, so you don't have too wild swings. And then we have 80% in stock, which gives you a lot of growth over the long term. Now, you're going to have a lot of volatility with this one, so when you open your statement and you see it down 20, 30%, don't panic, because that's just the nature of the beast. As you usually get older, you go down on the scale to more and more conservative, because you're basically not trying to earn more, you're just really trying to keep what you have and keep up with inflation. Now, this is different for every person. You have some older people that want to be here, and you have some younger people that want to be there. So it has to be customized to your risk tolerance. What's going to keep you up at night? Because a lot of people can't take a 20% swing in their, they've saved a good hunk of money and have a 20% drop one day. So it's one of the things that we have a discussion about to make sure that your asset allocation is proper. And like I said, it really depends on you. So let's review on our investment strategy. First, we need to identify financial goals and set priorities. Determine risk tolerance and selection of a proper asset allocation. And create an investment plan and strategy. Basically, how we're going to shift between those asset allocations, when are we going to rebalance our portfolio, and rebalance is basically setting it back to where it is. And we definitely want to monitor our portfolio. Once again, we don't want to be in a situation where we're 50 years old or whatever, and we're 100% stock or something like that, because unless your risk tolerance dictates that it's okay, usually it's not a good thing for most people. So that brings us to our next topic, which is retirement. And I said again, when should we start saving for retirement? Now, as soon as you start getting some income, you should be putting some aside all the time. I say that because due to how the business landscape has been developing over the last few decades, your grandparents or your parents might have this plan. They're going to depend on Social Security. You don't know how many people I've run across that that's their plan. They were going to retire, they're going to get their Social Security check and call it a day. The maximum Social Security will pay you, and that's if you wait till you're 70 years old, today is about $30,000 a year. Do you think once you become successful in your career, that say if you're making $80,000, that you can take a swing back to $30,000? And most people get paid way less than that, usually around $20,000, $24,000, $25,000. And there's some anxiety too, that knowing that Social Security is going to be there for us when we get older. We don't really know. We don't know what it's going to look like when we, are entitled to it. And as you see on this chart, back when it was right in the 1950s, do we know how Social Security works then? That they take it out your check. Current workers pay basically for today's retirees, what they paid for the retirees of their day. So it's kind of a rolling deal. We had almost 17 people won back in 1950 making those payments because, I'll answer that. In 2010, that dropped to 3.3, and 2025 is projected to be almost 2 to 1. So that revenue stream going in is drying up, while baby boomers and everyone else is starting to pick up. So we'll have to push back the retirement age. Are they going to cut benefits? We don't know. So that's for the politicians to figure out. But we have to start thinking about that's not going to be the traditional retirement that our grandparents enjoy or maybe our parents enjoy. Does anyone know a reason kind of why that's happening too? Less children, definitely. But one of the biggest drivers of this is people are living longer. Back when the program was incepted, the average age was around 60, 70 years old. People live into their 90s now. And probably by the time we get old, we'll be well into our hundreds maybe. So not only are we paying, but people are sticking around longer to pay out more. So that's one of the drains on the system. So if you take some of my clientele, some of the older retirees, I deal primarily with retirees, this is what they think about. This is when you normally people say when you hit about 50, that's when you start thinking about retirement. 80% of people, let's say Americans, responded that they're worried they won't be able to complete their financial goals. And normally what that means in retirement is that they won't be able to retire when they want to. They may not be able to retire. 42% have enough money to sustain their lifestyle in retirement. 27%, even in their later years, are still worried about paying off their home. You think that should have been done long ago? Some people want to leave a legacy, and that's big, especially with the wealthier clients, is leaving an inheritance in place for the children or the grandchildren, taking care of their educational needs. And some of them were trying to save up to buy another dream home or vacation home. So that's just some of the things that people think about as they get older that you should be thinking about now. Once again, let's talk about retirement plans. Does anyone know what a defined benefit plan is? No? Well, basically, that's what we call a pension. Most companies, back in the old days, most people had worked for a company for 30 or 40 years. years, and that was their incentive to be there, is that they pay them a pension as long as in their retirement. That's in about the mid-'80s, that started declining rapidly. There's not a lot of companies that pay a pension anymore. On the other hand, defined contribution plans, which are typically known as profit-sharing plans, or you might know them as 401ks, 403bs, that type of deal, depending on where you work. But 401k is normally the standard, has skyrocketed. So basically what companies have done is they've taken your retirement burden and shifted it to you. It's your responsibility now to provide for your own retirement. And those trends don't seem to be changing anytime soon. So where does retirement come from for today's retirees? And this is something that you should think in your mind as you move forward and start making money. %, and this is for all retirees. So 17% is Social Security, depending on Social Security. Pensions, once again, that pie is going to start getting smaller and smaller. Investments, that portion should be getting bigger, but most Americans aren't saving properly, so that's probably going to remain somewhat static. And then look at the biggest piece of the pie. 45% is earned income, which means they're still working. So is that retirement? No. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that if you don't have enough assets, if you don't have a plan, you might have to continue to work. Then 3% from other sources. So saving for retirement. Start as soon as you can. $5,000 invested in an IRA for 35 years, which is doable for most of you. That comes out to like $400 for a little over $400 a month for retirement savings. At an annual rate of 7%, grows to almost $750,000 over 35 years due to the power of compounding. Anyone have a calculator? What's 35 times 5? 35 times 5. 175. So you put 175 in and you get almost $750,000 out. That's not too bad, huh? But $750,000 out. So start as soon as possible because this depends on time because of compounding. So let's look at an example. If you waited a year, if you're 25, you waited 1 year, that's how much that amount goes down. It drops $112,000. If you wait till you're my age, around 34, 35, and you put it off a year, once again, that's how much it would, I'm sorry, not just drop, that's how much it would be worth. And then 45, 46, that's the difference too. So starting early as possible, you get a lot more return on your money than waiting and putting it off, which a lot of people do. So choosing an IRA that's worked for you, IRA, also called an IRA. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this, but basically there's two different routes that you can take. You can do what's called a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. Now under current law, you can kind of think of it as they're going to tax you after or they're going to tax you before because the tax man is going to get their cut either way. But it depends on how you want to take that cut. And as you do some wealth planning, you'll kind of see, because there's a lot of rules on how much income you have, how much your household income is. But normally, I'd say for most people, especially starting off, a Roth IRA should be the way you should go. One, it's after tax, so you can't claim it on your tax return at the end of the year. You can contribute this year about $5,500 per year, not $5,000 like another slide. But the contributions aren't tax deductible, but any growth in that account is tax-free. You never have to pay taxes on it again. Unlike the traditional IRA, once you take money out of the traditional IRA, you're going to be taxed. So this gives you a lot more flexibility because another thing that happens too as you get older, a traditional IRA, once you reach 70 and a half, the government makes you start taking money out of their account if you want to or not. Roths, you don't have that concern. like I said, it gives you a lot more flexibility in the Roth. And also you have access to this. You can't touch an IRA until you're 59 and a half. This one you can actually dip into it for your contributions. So say if you put $10,000 in and it grows to $15,000, you still have access to that $10,000 without any penalties. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and this is one I usually recommend for younger clients. So action steps for investment for retirement. Start as soon as you can. Yesterday, preferably. Do it as quickly as possible. And even if it's not 10%, put something towards it. Doesn't have to be a ton, but you'll be surprised. Little by little, a little becomes a lot. Invest every year, or monthly, or however you get paid. Sometimes a good practice too is if you get a big tax return, instead of going out and spending it, save it. And that can kind of go into an IRA or something like that. That's a good way to just kind of practice saving. You know, sometimes it's hard for people because sometimes you can get some pretty good checks back. But if you have the discipline to do it, that's another good way to save. Meet your company's 401k match. Now, we didn't talk much about 401ks, but most employers will match. For every dollar you put in, they normally put 50 cents or a dollar in to match it up to some number. So some of them are 5%. It just depends on who you work for. But meet your match. If you're not taking advantage of your 401k, that 50 cent or dollar match is just free money that's going away. So you're working for it, get it. And that's to incentivize you to save. And then once again, over all of it, your 401k, your IRAs, any of your investments, monitor it and keep up with it and make sure that it's still performing, the risk levels are still good, and continue to look after that. So question, we'll talk about debt a little bit. How long will it take to pay off $20,000 in credit card debt at a 20% interest if you make only the monthly payment every month? Any guesses? How much? Close. According to the Federal Reserve, 84 years. One of the things with compound interest is that it can work against you too. In investing, it works for you. You take your principal that you put in, at 100 and low is at $75,000, and it grew to $750,000. Well, the same thing is happening when you have something on credit. That is constantly, and that's every day. It compounds every day. That's constantly eats away, or constantly increases and eats away at any progress you make in paying something off. So one of the things that we try to do is avoid debt if we can. Don't use credit cards to go on spending sprees. If you get a nice shiny new plastic card, I know sometimes you have a high limit or something like that, and it gets real tempting to go out and get something on sale. And that's fine sometimes, you can use it because I kind of view a credit card as kind of like a hammer. You can do two things with a hammer. You can build something with a hammer, or you can destroy something with a hammer too, right? So, and it's all on how you swing it. If you're focused and disciplined with it, you can build your credit very easily with a credit card. But if you're reckless with it, you can mess up your credit a lot easier than it is to build it. So, and once again, that's going to interfere with future job prospects. So stay on top of that. Learn where you're at on your credit report and get your credit report score. So reduce personal debt. Here's some tips. Access your total amount of debt. Make sure add it all up. If you have this credit card, that credit card, your car note, house note, whoever you're paying money to, add that up and see where you're at. And if you can actually afford to service what you have, and if you can afford to even expand on it more. A lot of times we get in a lot of trouble not knowing how much they owe. They just pay that monthly minimum, and that's just something that's just draining away at their paychecks. Examine your budget. Once again, that goes back to the beginning. That should be a line item in your budget is how much I'm paying on credit, on my credit card, on my house note, whatever. And try to pay that off as quickly as possible. if you had $1,000 credit limit and you max it out, if you pay more of that up front, say if you put $500, then start making smaller payments, you'll pay a lot less than trying to make monthly payments than doing like a lump sum at the end, because that compounding is working against you. Consider increasing payments towards the highest interest debt first. This one is technically correct, but sometimes I've seen a different view, that if you have a bunch of different credit, if you owe a bunch of different people, sometimes it's more advantageous to actually pay the smallest one off first, because there's a psychological benefit of saying, okay, I got that $100 bill out the way, let me work on the $500 one or something of that nature. So it's got to be whatever you're most comfortable with. But if you have a 20% credit card and a 4 or 5% student loan, pay them both, but try to hammer out the credit card loan more, because that interest is greater, so it's charging you more. And as you pay that down, it becomes a little bit more manageable. Be mindful of long-term goals before taking on any new debt. Remember your plan. Remember that over the long term, if you're spending a whole bunch of money, you're paying a lot of bills back, and you're trying to put more debt on you, that might interfere with retirement, that might interfere with some of the long-term goals that you have set for yourself. So before you make a bill, think about the consequences of the bill. And how many people have kids? A few. I think I'll open it up to questions. I don't think I'll do education unless anybody wants to know about education planning, but I think it would be more advantageous probably just to answer some questions that people have. So I'll open up the floor. What do you want to know? Yes, sir.
I'm interested in learning about having a line of credit.
Okay.
Would that coincide with having a credit card? How does that work? I'm just not sure about having a line of credit.
Expand on what do you mean a line of credit?
I'm not sure what it is at all.
A line of credit is a little bit different from a credit card. A credit card is a form of credit, but technically a line of credit is that you go to a bank and say, I need $20,000 just to have on standby in case I decide to do it. You have to have some reason that you want the loan. But normally that's just kind of a line of credit, a solution that if you need it, you can tap into it. But it's a little bit different than a credit card, technically.
Is there interest on that?
Yes, definitely. Anytime you borrow money from people, you're going to pay interest. Now, sometimes they run special promotions where you get 0% interest and that type of deal, but that's free. And take advantage of those if you can qualify. But most of the time, in normal, they're going to charge you interest. Anyone else? Come on, people pay me a lot of money to get this advice. I'm serious.
What type of investments, besides saving bonds and stuff like that, what type of investments can I make now?
Well, it depends on how much you have. Because sometimes, I'd say for people starting off, I'm a big fan of mutual funds. And not to pitch mutual funds, but it usually gives you a lot of diversification. I'm not a big fan of trying to pick and choose which stock you should buy. I think that having that diversified portfolio is definitely the way to go. So say if you had X amount of dollars, dividing it up between bonds, stocks, cash, and what have you to that asset allocation we talked about is going to get you where you want to go over the long run.
Do you have a 6 or a 12-month goal in mind? Can you do anything with your money for short term?
You can do, there's short-term instruments to invest, treasuries, there are bonds that pay a year or less, CDs, there are a couple of month CDs, 90-day CDs. They're not paying much right now because they're short-term, but as interest rates tick up, it's possibly a solution, definitely.
What is the minimum amount to start on an investment?
It depends on who you have the investment with and what you invest in. So some accounts, say if you open an IRA, some of them just require like $100 to put into it, and you put $50 a month or whatever into it, or whatever you want. If you're talking about just a straight like brokerage account, so you can buy and trade stocks online, you can do it for like a couple $1,000 at a full brokerage house like ours. Normally, the advisors have minimums that require their clients. So that could be 20,000 up to $500,000. So it just depends on who you do your business with. Yes, sir.
For a Roth or IRA, that initial payment of $100, like you said, and the monthly payment of $50, is that over a long-term period? Like, do I have to make a commitment to that, or can I say, like, after maybe 5 years, I don't want to put my money in that anymore?
Well, IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account. One of the things of it is that you can, you dictate how much you want to put into it. So if you want to open it with $5,000, you want to just max it out and say $5,500 at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, it's up to you.
Okay.
They're invented to try to incentivize people to save. Really, their 401k and all that IRA, is all those numbers come from the tax code. And that's the government's way of trying to incentivize people to save for their retirement. But that choice is totally yours. Yes, sir.
I was wondering about a 529.
529 is one of the education plans, actually. 529s are very flexible as far as what they do. They're kind of like a Roth in a way because they take after-tax money from your paycheck after taxes have been deducted, and you put that into a 529 plan, and any growth on that, as long as you use it for education expenses, is tax-free. So that's the benefit of it.
I want to ask whether you would advise someone to tie in their business credit line with their personal credit line, or try to keep them separate.
That's a tricky area.
I mean, by being a sole proprietor, you really don't have a choice, but yes.
Yeah, technically they're all intercommingled. Technically, as far as liability is concerned, it's always good business practice to separate your business expenses and your business from your personal business, just in case the IRS ever comes want to audit your books or something like that. Plus, it's just good business practice to know what's going on. If you're a sole proprietor, I would definitely recommend you trying to do like an LLC or something that gives you some liability protection, because
Before it's getting off the ground, you starting from ground zero.
it doesn't cost a lot to do an LLC. You can go to like LegalZoom or something. As long as you get the structure in place, it's a couple of $100, but trust me, it's worth it not being sued and they take everything you got. So just limiting that risk is it's more advantageous to do like an LLC. I'm not a big fan of sole proprietorships and partnerships, because something happens, people sue you, and everything's open to being taken. So they can take whatever you have. With a LLC, they only can take what the company has. Your assets are left alone.
Okay, how would you advise somebody for his investment? Say, if you wanted to put X amount of money for the business side to start building the credit on it, because I've been operating like 2 years, but my personal credit is A1, but my business credit is not. But they was asking me to tie them in, and that would help out on the business side. But everybody said don't do that.
It just depends on, are you the only person in your sole proprietorship, that you're the only one that's managing it?
The only.
Okay. That's going to lead into a deeper discussion, but one of the questions I have is, why is the business not so good and yours is good? So that'd be one of the things I would look at. A lot of times when you're a sole proprietor, they're going to look at you anyway and usually have personal guarantees. So say if you go to a bank to get a loan, they're normally going to try to secure something that you have with your own personal line. Normally how it works, until you build up enough momentum in your business to kind of carry it. But that's kind of a complex topic that you need to talk to someone about. Yes, ma'am.
What would you say would be the best way to raise your credit score?
Best, pay bills on time, definitely. That's one of the things that affect your credit the most. Look at what's called your credit utilization, which basically means how much of your credit line are you using. So if all your credit cards put together, all of your credit loans, if you have $10,000 worth of credit and you're at $8,000 in bills, basically in debt, that's 80% of your account. Try to keep it under 50, because that dings your credit score. Another thing is, don't apply for credit a lot, because the more they look into your credit report, that starts those every time you apply for credit, they pull your credit report and that lowers your score. potentially. And also, if you have any collections, liens, bankruptcies, does anyone know how long a bankruptcy lasts on your credit report?
7 years.
10 years. So that follows you around for 10 years, and it's almost a kiss of death when you have a bankruptcy for most of those 10 years. So try not to do that if possible. Plan. Don't get into too much debt. Most of your normal credit things like cell phone bills, credit card payments, that follows you around for 7 years. The bankruptcies are a little bit different. What else can affect your credit score? Usually those are the main factors that determine it. But basically with credit, it takes time to heal it, but definitely if you have like any erroneous information or things that are older than 7 years, so say if you had a debt or a collection that's back in 2003, you can call and say, take that off, you know, and that'll bring your score up. Anyone else?
What's the max of sole proprietor contribute to any type of portfolio?
Well, there's really no max.
But it's a min, right? I mean, like, for
The
an
min-
IRA, it's 5,000. For sole proprietor, it's totally different.
Well, sole proprietors actually, if you own your own business, there are retirement plans like simple IRAs, SEPs, and that type of deal that are available to you. And they give you a little bit different flair than someone that's working for a company or from another employer. So, and that gets a little complex too on which one's the best. But the minimum is really going to it's going to really be dependent on who you do business with, because it's going to vary between brokerage houses, it's going to vary between banks if you do it in a bank. Everyone has a different minimum.
Like, with your IRA, you're talking about the maximum that you contribute and you're getting into $5,500.
Right.
But if I was a sole proprietor and I had my own business, I could contribute at probably $50,000.
Yes, it's somewhere around 49.5, something like that. It adjusts every year. But for a simple IRA, I believe it is 49. I think so, yeah. What else? We still have 10 minutes to kill.
Let me give you a scenario for the thing. You said if you did 5,000 in 35 years at 7%, what would be 10,000 in 7 years at 25? I mean at 7%.
That I would need a financial calculator for. But since you don't have compounding, I'd say even if you double down, I'd say just roughly estimating, you probably still have a lot less than that 5,000 at 35 years. Probably about half, really, if not less than that.
So it would be less if you contribute more than with less amount of time?
Yeah, because that time component, that compounding, when you start young, say if you start at 21 and you let it go for 40 years, and when you retire, when you try to do it at 20, it affects it big time, even if you double up sometimes. Because you don't have that amount of time for it to compound on itself. And that's just rough numbers, just doing it kind of.
And so the average for an IRA is 7%?
We just figured, because it's kind of hard to know exactly what's going to happen, we kind of take average returns over a historic period and kind of use a roundabout figure for 7. This makes numbers simple. But it's really going to depend on how aggressive you are. If you're in 100% stock, or if you're in 100% cash, then no, it's not going to grow at 7% unless something gets really wacky with interest rates. But it's one of the things that we have to sit down and talk about to plan. What else? I know we have some other questions. Yes, ma'am.
Having a DIN file for your credit score seems that being bad credit.
No. Bad credit basically refers to your credit score. Normally that's ranges between, I think, 400 and 850, with 850 being like flawless, super extra baller credit, you know, and 4 or 3, somewhere in there, I think it's 4, is really bad credit. So it's just kind of telling you where you, and they base that off your history. So if you've been paying your bills, if you're not in too much debt, normally you'll be somewhere in the middle of somewhere in the 600 range is about average.
I don't have any credit for me, but you said a DIN file, so it wouldn't let me look at the exact number, but I have to combine even though it needs.
Okay. Well, it's still good to kind of know what it is and kind of keep on top of it, because it can sometimes, especially if you have a common name like I'm Joe Smith, you know, there are tons of Joe Smiths out there, so sometimes they don't get it right 100% of the time. So it's good to check and make sure. That's our way. Yes.
Is it possible to not have credit? Is that
It is
necessarily a bad
possible,
thing?
but it's kind of hard in today's world not to have credit.
Like even
Especially,
if I don't have a credit card, does that mean I still don't have credit?
you probably don't. You don't probably have an established line of credit. There's another thing that they look at too is your credit history. So if you have, if you had accounts open for 20 years, they have a better read on you than you opened one 2 months ago. So that affects your credit score too. But it's very hard in today's society because it's so tied into everything that we do financially. Your insurance, for your car insurance, your homeowner's insurance, they're going to look at your credit report, and your premium is going to be based somewhat on your credit score. They've kind of found that people with bad credit tend to file more claims, so they charge them more. Jobs, when you go apply for a job, they look at your credit history. They're seeing exactly because your credit history is basically your history of are you paying your debts? Are you being responsible? Are you paying back what you say you're going to pay back to people? So it's kind of a test of your integrity too. So that's why companies look at it. And plus your financial life, because anytime you go for a loan, they're going to look at your credit. So if you need, unless you have a couple of million hidden somewhere, it's possible to make it buy without credit if you pay for everything cash and never need to get a loan for anything. But for most people, you have to get a loan for a house, car, whatever. Yes, ma'am.
Like you said, I don't have credit either. I use a debit card. I don't have a credit card. But how would you suggest, like, a person not having credit, what is the best way to, like, build credit?
Best way to build credit is actually to use credit. You have to, and that's kind of the game that they play, is that to play in the game, you have to use a credit card. Normally, if you have like a car loan and it reports to the credit bureaus, you're building credit. If you have usually cell phone bills, that type of thing, your daily utilities, unless you just don't pay them and you become collections, they normally don't report. I've never really seen them ever put on a credit report. But normally, if you don't have good credit, what you can do is get what's called a secured credit card, which basically you pay in an X amount of dollars. So say if you want a $500 credit card limit, you pay the bank $500 as a deposit. They keep that, and they give you a credit line of $500. And they normally, you can charge like a regular charge card up to $500, whatever you gave them. And that's a way to kind of help build it. And after they see that, usually about a year that you've been responsible with it, they normally will take that off. It depends on the bank, but normally they'll give you your $500 back and make it what's called unsecured, which most credit cards are. Now, if you don't pay it, they take $500, but it's secured by the money that you put into it. Yes, ma'am.
How does your spouse's credit affect your own?
Depends. That's kind of complex too, but normally good credit doesn't cover up bad credit. So if you go apply for something joint, normally that can impact their decision, because they're going to say, there's an old saying that if you marry someone with bad credit, what you get is bad credit. So, that's another reason to keep good credit too, is that your spouse or your potential mate makes life a little easier for you, both of you.
Do they normally average it out even if there's only one source of income?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Normally that really depends on the underwriter who's writing the loan and, various other factors that you look at. So that's not quite my field. Well, that's it. Save, and save. I always say that you should save mindlessly and spend consciously. So make sure that you're doing it automatically. That if you have a paycheck coming in, get it auto-directed to your 401k or whatever. Just put it on automatic so you can think about it. You can't spend it if it's not there. So, and it kind of helps with the discipline factor. So, thank you so much for your time. I hope it was helpful. And good luck and be successful.